The day the aliens came was eating a ham sandwich in the break room of the power station. He had worked there for 23 years, ever since he got out of the army, and he had never once thought about aliens. He thought about fishing. He thought about his daughter's college tuition. He thought about whether the Browns would ever win a championship again. But aliens, that was movie stuff. Then the emergency broadcast came through on every phone in the building, and put down his sandwich and watched the world change forever. The ships appeared over every major city on Earth at exactly the same moment. Scientists would later argue about how this was possible, how anything could coordinate across such distances with such precision. But in those first hours, nobody was arguing about science. They were just staring at the sky, at the massive crystalline structures that hung there like frozen lightning bolts, beautiful and terrifying. In New York, a ship 3 miles long cast a shadow over Manhattan. In Beijing, another blocked out the sun. In London, Paris, Moscow, Tokyo, Sydney, Cairo, Mexico City, Mumbai, and 100 other places, humanity looked up and understood that they were not alone, and they were not in charge. The message came 12 hours later, broadcast in every language simultaneously. The aliens called themselves and their speaker was a creature named Supreme Commander Al. His image appeared on every screen on Earth, a being that looked like someone had built a man out of purple glass and given him too many joints. His eyes were like polished obsidian, and when he spoke, his mouth moved in ways that made human viewers uncomfortable. Of Earth, the translation said, you have been selected for integration into the Dominion. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. In 48 hours, you will surrender your planetary government to our administration. You will provide workers for our mining operations. You will provide resources for our expansion. In return, we will allow your species to continue existing. Resist, and you will be removed. We have done this 17 times before. You will not be different. The transmission ended. Across the world there was silence. Then there was chaos. Governments held emergency meetings. Militaries scrambled jets and mobilized troops. Protesters filled the streets, though nobody was quite sure what they were protesting. Religious leaders called for prayer. Scientists called for calm. On social media, people argued about whether the aliens were real, whether this was a hoax, whether they should fight, whether they should surrender, whether this was the end of the world or the beginning of something new. In Washington, President sat in the Situation Room and listened to her advisors tell her things she did not want to hear. Our missiles can't get through, General Harrison said. He was a big man with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had served in 3 wars and had never lost a battle, but he had never fought aliens before. We launched a test strike from a submarine in the Pacific, 4 cruise missiles. Their ships didn't even acknowledge them. Some kind of energy field absorbed the impacts like they were nothing. Nuclear options, the president asked. Same problem. We ran simulations based on the energy readings we're getting from those shields. Even a direct hit from our largest warhead wouldn't scratch them. It's not that they're strong. It's that they're operating on principles we don't understand. Then what do we do? Nobody had an answer. 3,000 miles away, in a basement laboratory at MIT, Dr. Sarah had not slept in 36 hours. She was 41 years old, with black hair that she kept short because she never had time to deal with it, and eyes that were red from staring at computer screens. Her specialty was theoretical physics, specifically the intersection of electromagnetic fields and quantum mechanics. It was obscure work, interesting to about 12 people on the entire planet. Completely useless for anything practical. Until today. It doesn't make sense, she muttered, running the numbers again. It doesn't make any sense. Her assistant, a graduate student named David Park, looked up from his own screen. What doesn't? Their shields, look at these readings. The military sent over everything they collected from the test strike. The energy absorption pattern isn't random. It's modulated. It's responding to something. Responding to what? Sarah pulled up a frequency chart and overlaid it with another data set. Background electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, microwaves, everything we pump into the atmosphere. Their shields are using it, drawing from it, like a solar panel draws from sunlight. David frowned. So they're powered by our own signals. Not powered exactly, stabilized. The shields create a field that needs constant input to maintain coherence. On there they probably have some kind of natural M source. Here they're using ours. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. It's elegant, actually. Wherever they go, whatever planet they conquer, there's always going to be some kind of electromagnetic activity they can tap into. Stars give off radiation. Planets have magnetic fields. The universe is noisy. Okay, but how does that help us? Sarah didn't answer right away. She was thinking about something she had read years ago, about early nuclear testing, about how the first atomic bombs had created electromagnetic pulses that knocked out electronics for miles around. The military had spent decades hardening their equipment against such attacks, but they hadn't. Why would they? They came from a world where electromagnetic silence was probably impossible. What if we made it quiet? She said. What? What if we turned everything off? Every power plant, every radio tower, every phone, every car, every light bulb. What if we created a zone of complete electromagnetic silence? David stared at her. That's impossible. You'd have to coordinate the entire planet. And even if you could, people would panic. The chaos alone would kill thousands. We'll kill billions if we don't do something. Sarah stood up and grabbed her phone. I need to talk to someone in the military, someone who'll actually listen. She had met General once at a conference 3 years ago. He had been curious about her work, had asked intelligent questions, had given her his card and told her to call if she ever had any ideas that might be useful. She had never called. Her ideas weren't useful. They were theoretical, abstract, pointless. Until now. Answered on the second ring, this is. General, this is Dr. Sarah. We met at the Quantum Applications Conference in 2022. You probably don't remember. I remember. You're the one who explained why faster-than-light communication was impossible in a way that actually made sense. What do you have? Sarah took a deep breath. I think I know how to bring down their shields, but you're not going to like it. She explained everything. The frequency modulation, the ambient M dependence, the theoretical vulnerability, listened without interrupting, and when she was done, there was a long silence. You're telling me, he said slowly, that if we turn off all the power on Earth, their shields will fail. In theory, yes. The shields need constant electromagnetic input to maintain coherence. Remove that input and they should collapse, at least temporarily. Maybe only for a few minutes, but that might be enough. Enough for what? To hit them with everything we have before they figure out what's happening. Another silence. Sarah could hear breathing on the other end of the line. Doctor, do you have any idea what you're suggesting? A global blackout. That's not just flipping a switch. That's coordinating every power grid on the planet. That's convincing every country to shut down simultaneously. That's asking 8 billion people to sit in the dark and trust that we know what we're doing. I know, General, but it's also the only chance we have. Exhaled. I'll get you in front of the president. Be ready to explain this again. And doctor, you better be right about this. The call ended. Sarah put down her phone and looked at David, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and horror. Did you just convince a general to try to black out the entire planet? I convinced him to listen. That's a start. She grabbed her jacket. Come on, we need to put together a presentation. And we need to find the biggest, most reliable manual power switch in the eastern seaboard. Something mechanical, something that doesn't need electricity to work. Why? Because when everything goes dark, we're going to need a way to bring it back. And I want to be the one holding that switch. They left the laboratory and stepped out into a night that had never seemed so dark. Above them, the lights of the ship hung like a second moon, cold and patient. Sarah looked up at it and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not despair. Hope. It was crazy. It was impossible. It would require a miracle of coordination that humanity had never achieved in its entire history. But it was also a chance, and sometimes that was enough. In 48 hours, they expected humanity to kneel. They had done their research. They had studied human history, human wars, human divisions. They knew about the tribalism, the nationalism, the endless conflicts over resources and ideology and religion and skin color. They knew that humans couldn't cooperate even when their own planet was dying from climate change. They had no idea what they were dealing with. President stood in the Oval Office and stared at the woman in front of her. Dr. Sarah was shorter than she had expected, with none of the polished confidence that usually came with people who got invited to the White House. She looked tired. She looked scared, but she also looked certain. "Let me understand this correctly," the president said. "You want me to convince every nation on Earth to simultaneously shut down their power grids, based on a theory that hasn't been tested, in the hope that this will somehow make alien shields vulnerable to weapons that have already failed against them?" "Yes, Madam President. And if you're wrong, we'll have caused global chaos for nothing. The aliens will still destroy us, and I'll go down in history as the leader who convinced humanity to die in the dark." "That's accurate, yes." The president looked at General, who was standing by the door with his arms crossed. "And you believe her?" "I believe it's the only option that doesn't end with surrender or extinction. Our conventional weapons are useless. Our nuclear arsenal is useless. We have 36 hours left. If Doctor is right, we have a chance. If she's wrong, we're no worse off than we were going to be anyway." President walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. She could see the glow of the alien ship over Washington, a pale blue light that seemed to mock every light below it. "How do we coordinate this?" she asked. "Half the world's governments don't trust us. Some of them might refuse just to spite us. And even the ones who agree, how do we synchronize a global shutdown to the second?" "We use their own fear against them," Sarah said. "Every nation has seen what weapons can do. Every leader knows what extinction looks like. We don't need them to trust us. We need them to trust their own survival instincts." "And the people? How do we convince 8 billion people to turn off their lights and sit in the dark?" Sarah paused. This was the question she had been dreading. The logistics of shutting down power grids were complicated but solvable. Engineers knew how to flip switches. But convincing ordinary people to participate, to believe, to act together, that was something else entirely. "We tell them the truth," she said finally. "We tell them that we have a plan, that it requires their help and that it might not work. We tell them that we're scared too. But we also tell them that this is our chance to show the universe what humans are made of. Not our weapons, not our technology, our ability to choose each other." The president turned around. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "That's either the most inspiring thing I've ever heard or the most naive. I honestly can't tell which." "Neither can I, Madam President, but I think we should find out." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the White House air conditioning was the only sound. Outside, the alien ship waited. Then President picked up her phone. "Get me the UN Secretary General. Then get me the leaders of China, Russia, and the EU. We're going to need everyone for this." She looked at Sarah. "God help us all, Doctor. We're going to try it your way." Sarah nodded. She didn't believe in God, but she believed in math. She believed in physics. And right now, she believed in the desperate, stubborn, impossible hope that when it mattered most, humanity could surprise even itself. 36 hours. That was all the time they had to convince a divided, frightened, skeptical world to do something unprecedented, to turn off every light, to silence every signal, to trust each other in the darkness. The countdown had begun. The message went out to every nation on Earth at noon the next day. It was not a speech from a politician or a statement from a government. It was a simple video, recorded in the basement lab at MIT, showing Dr. Sarah explaining exactly what needed to happen and why. She spoke clearly and slowly, without jargon, without promises, without propaganda. She explained the science in terms that anyone could understand. She admitted that she might be wrong. She asked for help. In 18 hours, she said at the end, we need every light on Earth to go dark, every phone to go silent, every generator to stop. It will be scary, it will be hard, but it will also be our answer to they think they know us. They think they've studied our history and understand our weaknesses, but they've never seen what we can do when we work together. They've never seen humanity united. Tomorrow night, we show them. Tomorrow night, we give them something to remember. The video went viral in minutes. It was translated into every language. It was shared on every platform. And slowly, impossibly, people began to respond. In Lagos, a junior engineer named started making calls. The West African power grid was a patchwork of systems that had never been designed to work together. Shutting it down would require coordination between 12 different countries with 12 different governments and 12 different sets of engineers who didn't always speak the same language. Didn't care. She got to work. In Tokyo, a retired electrician named remembered the blackouts of his childhood, the way his mother would light candles and tell stories until the power came back. He went door to door in his neighborhood, explaining the plan, answering questions, calming fears. By midnight, his entire block had agreed to participate. A teenager named Maria Costa organized her friends on social media. They called it the Dark Hour Challenge. Turn off your lights, post a video, tag 10 friends. Within hours, millions of people had joined. And in Washington, General worked the phones, calling military commanders around the world, explaining the plan, coordinating timing, answering the same questions over and over. Yes, it was crazy. Yes, it might not work. Yes, they were doing it anyway. We have maybe 60% global participation confirmed, he told the president at the final briefing. That might be enough. It might not. We won't know until we try. What about countries that refused? Russia and China are on board, surprisingly. So is most of Europe. The holdouts are mostly smaller nations with unstable grids who aren't sure they can restart once they shut down. We're sending technical teams to help where we can. And the military strikes. Ready to launch the moment the shields drop. Assuming they drop, every nuclear submarine we have is in position. Every missile silo has manual backup. We've dusted off weapons that haven't been operational in decades. If this works, we hit them with everything. And if it doesn't work? Didn't answer, he didn't need to. The hours passed. Around the world people prepared. Some prayed, some celebrated, some argued, some wept. But as the clock ticked down, as the moment approached, something remarkable happened. They stopped fighting each other. They stopped arguing about politics and borders and old grudges. They stopped looking down and started looking up, at the ships that hung over their cities like a reminder of how small their differences really were. At 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, the countdown reached zero, and humanity, for the first time in its history, chose darkness together. They had conquered 17 worlds. They had protocols for everything. They had contingency plans for resistance, for natural disasters, for equipment failures, for every scenario their strategists could imagine. They did not have a protocol for silence. Supreme Commander Al was on the bridge of his flagship when the first warnings came. The ambient electromagnetic readings, which had been stable since their arrival, began to drop. It was subtle at first. A percentage point here, a fluctuation there. Nothing that should concern a fleet that had dominated species far more advanced than these humans. Then the lights went out. Not on the ship, on the planet below. In an expanding wave that started on one side of Earth and swept around to the other, city after city went dark. The radio signals that had been chattering constantly since their arrival fell silent. The satellite transmissions that they had been monitoring for intelligence purposes ceased. The entire electromagnetic spectrum, which had been as noisy as any civilized world, became as quiet as deep space. Al felt it before his instruments confirmed it, a wrongness, an absence, like suddenly being unable to breathe. "Commander," one of his bridge officers said, "our shield harmonics are destabilizing." "Compensate." "We cannot. There is nothing to compensate with. The ambient field is gone. Our shields are drawing on reserves, but at this rate, they will fail in approximately 4 of the local minutes." For the first time in his military career, Supreme Commander Al felt fear, not of the humans, not of their primitive weapons, but of the silence, the horrible, impossible silence. "Order all ships to withdraw to high orbit, now." "Sir, if we retreat, the humans will think." "I do not care what they think. Move." But it was too late. The shields were already flickering, and in the dark below, humanity was waiting. General watched the satellite feeds with held breath. The images were being captured by a single military satellite that had been hardened against EMP and was running on minimal power, just enough to relay what was happening in orbit. The shields were failing. He could see it, the blue glow around each ship stuttering like a dying fluorescent bulb. One by one, the crystalline vessels that had seemed so invincible were becoming vulnerable. "Fire everything," he said, "now." Across the planet, in submarines beneath dark oceans, in silos buried under silent mountains, officers turned keys and pressed buttons. The missiles launched, trails of fire rising from a world without light. It took 7 minutes for the first warheads to reach orbit, 7 minutes during which they scrambled desperately to restore their shields, to find some source of electromagnetic energy in the void that Earth had become. 7 minutes during which Supreme Commander Al understood, finally, what he had underestimated. Not human weapons, not human technology. Human will. The missiles struck. Without shields, the crystalline hulls shattered like glass. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, visible from every continent, pinpricks of light against the alien ships. One vessel broke apart, then another, then a dozen. On the surface, people who had been sitting in the dark looked up and saw fire in the sky. They didn't know exactly what was happening. They didn't know if they were winning or losing, but they knew something had changed. They knew their darkness had done something. And they stayed silent, they stayed still, they trusted. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, only 12 ships remained, fleeing toward their carrier at the edge of the solar system. Supreme Commander Al was not among the survivors. His flagship had been one of the first to fall, struck by 4 separate nuclear warheads in rapid succession. The being who had demanded humanity's surrender didn't even have time to understand what had happened before he ceased to exist. On Earth, the lights began to come back on. It happened slowly at first, one grid at a time, engineers working through checklists and protocols that had been rehearsed but never tested. There were failures. There were accidents. In some places, the power wouldn't come back for days, but it came back. And when it did, the celebrations began. In New York, people poured into Times Square and stood where the alien ship had cast its shadow, looking up at a sky that was finally empty. In Tokyo, strangers hugged in the streets, laughing and crying at the same time. In Lagos, finally allowed herself to sleep, knowing that her work had mattered. In Maria Costa and her friends danced until dawn. Dr. Sarah watched the sunrise from the roof of the MIT physics building. David was beside her, equally exhausted, equally stunned. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." "They did it," Sarah corrected. "All of them, every person who turned off a light, every engineer who shut down a grid, every leader who took a risk. I just did the math." The math was pretty important. She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in days. Yeah, I guess it was. Below them, the campus was coming back to life. Students who had spent the night in darkness were emerging from dorms, checking their phones, learning what had happened while they couldn't see. The news was everywhere. Humanity had won. Humanity had survived. Humanity had done the impossible. The days that followed were chaotic. There was damage to assess, systems to repair, questions to answer. World leaders held press conferences. Scientists analyzed wreckage. Theologians debated meaning. Everyone had an opinion about what had happened and what it meant. But beneath the noise, something had changed. Something that couldn't be measured or explained in a press release. People remembered the darkness. They remembered choosing to trust. They remembered looking up at the sky and knowing that somewhere on the other side of the world, someone they would never meet was doing the same thing. It didn't solve everything. The old divisions didn't disappear overnight. There were still wars to fight, arguments to have, problems to solve. Humans were still human. But they were also something more now. They had proven something to themselves, something that they had never understood and could never have predicted. When it mattered most, when the stakes were highest, when the darkness was deepest, humanity could choose to stand together. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, a diplomatic shuttle approached Earth under a flag of truce. The new ambassador was a creature named, younger and more cautious than Al had been. He had studied the reports from the battle. He had analyzed what had gone wrong. He still didn't entirely understand it. But he understood enough to know that these humans were different from any species the Dominion had encountered before. Different and dangerous. He knelt before the UN General Assembly, his crystalline body reflecting the lights of the chamber. The humans watched him in silence, their faces unreadable. "We seek terms," he said. General, who had been asked to represent Earth in the negotiations, nodded. He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He simply gestured to a chair. "Sit down," he said. "Let's talk." The negotiations took months. They wanted to understand what had happened, how the humans had known their weakness, how they had coordinated a global response so quickly. The humans wanted assurances that the Dominion would never threaten Earth again. Both sides had demands. Both sides had fears. In the end, they reached an agreement. They would withdraw from this sector of space. They would share certain technologies as reparations for their attempted conquest. They would recognize Earth as a sovereign world, not subject to integration or exploitation. And in return, humanity agreed to keep their secret. The Dominion's weakness, the vulnerability of their shields, the fact that a single coordinated blackout could bring their entire military to its knees. It was a fair trade. They got to keep their reputation as unbeatable conquerors. Humanity got to keep their planet, and both sides got a story they could tell themselves about what had happened and why. But the real story was different. The real story wasn't about shields or weapons or diplomatic agreements. The real story was about a choice. Dr. Sarah received the Nobel Prize for Physics the following year. She accepted it with a short speech that was broadcast around the world. "People keep asking me how we did it," she said. "How we brought down the shields, how we won the battle. But I didn't do anything. I just found a weakness and told people about it. The real victory belonged to everyone who listened, everyone who trusted, everyone who sat in the dark and believed that somewhere someone else was doing the same thing." She paused, looking out at the audience. They studied our history. They saw our wars and our divisions and our failures. They thought they understood us, but they missed something. They missed the fact that we've always been capable of more than we seem, that beneath all our conflicts and differences, there's something that connects us, something that makes us reach for each other when things get darkest. We call it humanity. It's an imperfect thing. It fails us sometimes. We fail each other sometimes, but when it mattered most, it was enough, and I believe it always will be. The audience applauded. Doctor stepped down from the podium, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, they were still trying to figure out what had happened. They never did. On the anniversary of the blackout, a new tradition emerged. At midnight, wherever you were, whatever you were doing, you turned off the lights, just for 1 minute, just to remember. In cities and villages, in mansions and apartments, in places where people had electricity and places where they didn't, humanity paused. They looked up at the stars, at the vast universe that had seemed so threatening a year ago, and they remembered what they had done. Not just surviving, not just winning. Choosing. The darkness wasn't scary anymore. It was a reminder, a promise, a testament to what they could accomplish when they stopped looking at each other as enemies and started looking at each other as allies. One switch, one moment, one species united against the dark. Stood on the roof of the power station, watching the stars. He had become something of a local celebrity after the blackout, the man who had helped coordinate the shutdown in his region. He didn't think he deserved the attention. He had just done his job. But standing there looking up at the sky, he felt proud anyway. Not of himself, of all of them, of what they had proven. "Hey, Dad," his daughter said, climbing up to join him. She was home from college for the anniversary. "What are you thinking about?" He smiled. "Just thinking about how different everything is now. A year ago, we didn't know if we'd survive the week. Now look at us." "Pretty crazy, huh?" "Yeah," he put his arm around her. "Pretty crazy." The minute ended. The lights came back on, and somewhere out in the darkness of space, the stars kept shining. But they didn't seem quite so far away anymore.